There is this thing called vibe. So one team member says that they don't get good vibes from others, okay?
Yeah.
And the other person
Yeah.
also oftentimes ends up saying the same thing.
Psychological and safety are not easy things to build. We need to be competent in, because 2 out of
Okay.
3 won't be enough here, Pradeep. We have to
Okay.
consistently, I guess the fourth factor could be consistency.
How to deal with insecurities or how to deal with, let's say, ambiguity, right? That itself might be a skill. If you have that skill, people will still kind of find it safe to work under you. Character, as you mentioned.
It can take time to build. It takes time and effort, and of course we can lose it very quickly. Equally with psychological safety.
There's always this tension between trying to kind of drive the team via pressure, right? And at the same time, if you're too lenient, right, the employees can start taking you a bit less seriously.
The care, the character, the competence.
Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Today we have Clive Lloyd joining us to discuss about psychological safety at workplace. Clive has been working in the safety from last 30 years. He has been an executive coach. He has written books. He's one of the best-selling authors. He was also recently named among top 5 global thought leaders. He has also written a book called Next Generation Safety Leadership. He has around 30 years of experience, as I mentioned, in coaching psychology, both clinical and coaching psychology. And he's working out of Australia, but I think he works globally. Clive, please welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Pradeep, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'm glad you gave that, only because with the name Clive Lloyd, some of your audience might be expecting somebody else, a wonderful cricketer. So if they were expecting that Clive Lloyd, they might be feeling a little disappointed right now.
Thanks for joining and coming back to our topic of psychological safety. It's a very, very important and sensitive topic. In my own mind, the idea of safety can differ by a huge margin between two people, right? For example, psychological safety in the workplace, right? It's a very difficult topic if you think about it. What is safe for one person may be okay for another person, right? Someone might be okay with criticism, whereas someone else might fret at the idea of being criticized, right? So, how do you see psychological safety in the workplace?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. And so let me come back in a little while to the criticism aspect of that.
Mhm.
Because, yeah, that can be an interesting topic. But let me first define in fairly straightforward terms what I mean by psychological safety. And really, that is a shared belief by a team that it is actually safe psychologically to take interpersonal risk. That is, maybe to share my ideas, ask questions, perhaps even admit mistakes without fearing negative consequences like punishment or humiliation or rejection. So that's how I sort of frame psychological safety. So when you're thinking about criticism there, for example, some people maybe take criticism better than other people, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And it's an important point that you make, because psychological safety is not sort of one size fits all. There are different cultures with different personality variables. Neurodivergent people, for example, all might respond differently to some of the key aspects. Let me say this, though, when it comes to criticism, because criticism can come in different forms. For example, if I've just got a result and my leader is not very pleased with that result, my leader could choose to offer feedback, but in certain different ways. Now, if they offer feedback, or if you want to call that criticism, but it's done respectfully, it's done in a very adult to adult way, with the motivation of learning from my error, that's one thing. And I think most people actually would be okay with that. If it was done, however, Pradeep, in a way that's a personal attack, and it's done from a place of ego or power, and it's a real put down, I don't think many people at all would be okay with that. There's some research from Gerrit Hofstede, who identified what we now call the power distance index. And this varies from nation to nation and region to region. For example, in high power distance nations, such as a lot of Asia, South America, for example, those people in those nations tend to be more understanding of rigid hierarchy. and perhaps being spoken to in the ways I described before. People in
Right.
sort of low power distance nations like Australia, like the UK, for example, no, it's not as accepted. So naturally, where we are, what we've learnt, what the leadership style, they can all influence the degree to which criticism will be accepted or
Okay.
not. Let me just make
Okay.
a central point here too. Stop me if I'm talking too much, Pradeep. I do that. What we
Hmm.
know about psychological safety is it is leadership dependent.
Okay.
That is, some leaders are able to create the climate where psychological safety can emerge and thrive. And of course, some leaders are not. And so, of course, if as a leader, I want to create the climate where psychological safety can thrive, I would need to avoid punishing people after a mistake, for example. I would need
Okay.
to avoid criticism in its personal attack form. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
really good question that you raise. Some people might suggest there are ethics
Hmm.
regarded in there somewhere. You know, over here in Australia, by the way, low power distance. If a leader came to me with a pointed finger and yelled and screamed at me in a personal attack, we'd only see unlikely to create psychological safety, but also unethical in its approach. So but we do understand to get a shortcut answer to your fantastic question, it's not one size fits all. And if we're looking
Okay.
to build psychological safety, we do need to factor in things like leadership, the tones of our voice, power distance, personal differences, and also, of course, neurodivergent people. They're going to take feedback very differently.
Very, very interesting, Clive. I mean, I always used to look at psychological safety purely from, relationship point of view, but I never factored in the cultural angle here. But now that you're telling, I can
Yeah,
actually relate to it because, let's say in India also, right, in a lot of, let's say 2 decades back, in all the manufacturing companies, there used to be very rigid hierarchy. Until date, people are in some way accustomed to it, particularly in heavy industries. But things have changed in software, is what I have realized. For example, I'll tell you, when I joined my first company, right, called Infosys, we were given onboarding where we were told that you should not address somebody as sir. Okay. You should not call somebody as sir. You should always address people by name. If you think about it, it directly breaks all those hierarchies in a way if you can't address somebody as, with their name. In older times in India, manufacturing companies, that was impossible to even dream about. You have to always respectfully address your managers as sir or, in some way addressing that hierarchical structure. So it has changed a lot, particularly in the software industries, but the mindset may still be there in some form, in some shape. Very interesting. And as you mentioned, yeah, so psychological safety is not just about making things work in an organization, but it's also about ensuring that there is a adult to adult respect. When one guy is giving feedback to another, he should be giving it respectfully. It's completely okay to give feedback, but it should always be
absolutely.
respectful. It cannot be from the place of ego. You cannot yell, scream, or shout at somebody.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Okay, so
want
Clive,
people to get the impression, though, Pradeep. Sorry to interrupt.
mm, sure, please go
I
ahead.
don't want people thinking that it's just about being nice,
Mm,
and so forth. Because in psychologically safe teams, they can be quite straightforward in terms of we do give feedback and we
mhm,
might not like everything we're hearing. The difference is, of
mhm,
course, people
right.
feel safe in that regard. But it's not just about nice conversations or hiding things or not speaking up because I'm worried. So it can get fairly intense, but it's all done, as you said, in that adult respectful way. Yeah.
Clive, so the next question that I wanted to ask is you write a lot about the importance of trust, right, in an organization. How are trust and psychological safety related?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sometimes they may get confused. So, this is one of my favorite subjects. So,
Sure,
first
please go
up,
ahead.
can I say
Mm,
trust and psychological safety are very strongly related. In fact, I'd
okay.
suggest you can't really have psychological safety without trust. I guess the biggest difference is that psychological safety is more of a team construct. We talk about teams having psychological safety rather than individuals. Whereas with trust, we tend to think of it more as a relationship thing, say between one person or myself and another person such as yourself. So,
Mhm.
in other words, it's viewed more like an interpersonal belief where I trust somebody based on my previous experiences of them as
Mhm.
being with integrity, competent, and maybe having my best interests at heart. And if my experience of another person is they do work in those ways, I'm likely to have very high trust levels of them. Whereas again, psychological safety is more about not so much at the individual level, it's at the team, the whole team level, where everyone in that team feels like, again, as we mentioned before, it is safe to speak up, to share ideas, to share concerns. So I guess the main differences are those. Also, probably trust is more, yeah, interpersonal, between
Mhm.
me and myself, me and other people, rather. Whereas psychological safety probably more cultural, the cultural aspect of a team. To me, though, if I can suggest, I think sometimes the differences between trust and psychological safety are overblown. Um, Again, what I know is trust can also be thought of as a team concept. You can actually
Okay.
measure trust within teams. In fact, we've been doing that for a long, long time. And equally in a team that's got psychological safety, well, maybe one or two members of that team don't feel that psychological safety for some reason. So overall, I think they're more similar constructs than different, but they're not
Mm.
the same, if I can put it that way.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. What I understand is like trust is essentially your interpersonal thing. Like a person may trust other guy with his, he may be more open to discussing some certain idea with the person because he trusts him that he will keep it secret or he will kind of not shout back or yell. So there is a sense of safety in here because you feel safe discussing with that person, but still trust is an interpersonal thing. Whereas psychological safety means the whole environment, your whole workplace is such that people can openly share their ideas. People don't fret at the idea of sharing, something that someone will kind of humiliate them or call out their names and all those things. So yeah, there is a difference
Yeah,
and there is also kind of a relationship between trust
there
and
is.
safety, I can see. Okay.
If I could just add one more thing there too, you mentioned the workplace, Pradeep.
Mm.
Sometimes what we know again about psychological safety, because it's leader dependent. In a
Mm-hmm.
workplace, for example, you might have one team over here, but
Mm-hmm.
another team over here. One may have psychological safety, the other may not, even in the same workplace, because psychological safety is leader dependent. So if you've got two very different types of leaders in the same workplace, it doesn't
Okay.
guarantee that psychological safety will be across the whole business or workplace. We're talking again more about a given team rather than the whole workplace.
I think that's a very interesting thing that you're bringing in because what you're saying is how much how much psychological safety employee feels in an organization has huge kind of dependence on the fact what kind of leader he is
Yeah.
reporting to. Because a
Yeah.
leader can ensure that in his team or her team there is a lot of psychological safety, and a leader because leaders kind of approach becomes central to psychological safety. And if in the same organization there are multiple leaders with multiple teams, one leader may have completely different style of working and relationships, whereas the other person may have be totally different. So two different teams in the same organization may be also sitting in kind of very close by will have a completely different level of psychological safety related experiences
Yeah.
and so a lot of onus is on the managers or leaders to
Yeah.
ensure that their employees feel or their teams feel kind of healthy and safe. Huh? Okay.
Yeah, it does. The leader does carry a lot of this. I will say it's not all about leaders, but
Hmm.
leaders do have a very, very big impact, positively or negatively, on the formation of psychological safety.
Flip question to that is like because of the way the teams are, can leaders also feel psychologically unsafe in sharing ideas and all? Because let's say if the team has a lot of members who are disruptive, for a lack of a better word, I mean, do you think even the leaders also need psychological safe environment in a way?
Yeah, well, look, that's a really interesting point. I mean, leaders are people too. And
Right. Okay.
if let's say I've inherited a team, I've just come on board
Mm,
as the new leader, and let's
mm,
say that the team I used to a
mm.
more sort of laissez-faire leader, a soft leader, if I can use that terrible term. Um, yeah, I might have to think, gosh, is it actually safe for me right now to lead how I would normally lead? And look, in those moments, there can be a tendency to react to that and maybe
Mhm.
think I've got to be harsh with these people. I've got to
Right.
discipline them and so forth. That could be
Right.
a reaction.
Right.
Generally speaking, the leaders who are good at creating the environment where psychological safety can thrive, they would generally approach that in particular ways that would help their teams to actually maybe
Right.
reset how they work. But it's a great
The
question.
reason why I ask this question is because a lot of times, as you mentioned, when you start working with new teams, right, and you're not aware about their behaviors, their reactions, and leaders can worry a bit about sharing something, let's say, which is revolutionary or which the team may not find kind of natural or something which they've been used to, right? And that at that time, if the leader doesn't get the vibe that it will be accepted or people will start reacting too much, he also may kind of close up, right? He may not openly share the
Yeah.
ideas. Just thought came to my mind. Okay.
Yeah, I guess one thing that might help, and one of the characteristics of those leaders, is they do tend to bring their teams in, ask them
Mm,
lots of questions rather than making
okay.
assumptions. They do tend to listen, so they would tend to
Okay.
pick up on where the
Mm.
teams are at.
Considering this complexity of this topic, psychological safety and trust, my question is there a framework or lens through which we can approach the idea of trust or safety better and kind of, let's say we want to create some, not exactly rules, but guidelines. So what can we follow here?
Yeah, great question. And again, there's some wonderful books out on psychological safety. My book covers it quite well, but I'd go beyond that in terms of psychological safety. Probably the best known book and the leading author in the field of psychological safety is Professor Amy Edmondson, and she wrote a book called The Fearless Organization. That is a very, very good guide to not just understanding psychological safety, but having a good look how to create it. With trust, though, Pradeep, there are many frameworks out there, or several frameworks to help people or leaders understand trust. But I think the best known and the most widely accepted framework around trust was from Roger Myers' research, and this is back in 1995. It's been tweaked and added to through the 2000s, but really it's a three-factor model of trust. So Mayer would argue that for leaders, for example, to create trust within their teams, there are three core factors within this framework to guide leaders. Now, those three factors are integrity, ability, and benevolence. So, in other words, integrity, probably no surprise there. If we're not demonstrating integrity as leaders, it's difficult, to imagine people trusting us. It's not all about these people skills, though, Pradeep. Ability too, or competence. And that is, leaders will need to demonstrate that they are competent in the areas that they should be competent at. Otherwise, you can lose trust there too. The third factor is what the researchers called benevolence. That is
Okay.
simply care. To what
Okay.
degree my team consider me demonstrating care, having my team's best interests at heart. Now, we simplify this in our work a little bit, Pradeep. We simply
Mm,
refer to the 3C model of leadership,
okay.
which is care, character, and competence.
Oh,
And a
that's very
good way
interesting.
to check whether we're leading in a way that's likely to build trust is, well, do our workforce perceive that we are demonstrating care? Do we
Mm-hmm.
demonstrate character or integrity in what we do?
Mm,
And are we good? Are we competent in the areas we need to be competent in? Because two out of
okay.
three won't be enough here, Pradeep. We have to
Okay.
consistently, I guess the fourth factor could be consistency, because we do need
Okay.
to sort of do that. So that's an overview. That's a pretty good framework. And the great thing is there we can measure this. And we do that with organizations. We can measure
Okay.
how leaders individually and collectively
Mm.
operate in terms of those three C's: care, character, competence.
That's very interesting. So going a bit deeper into that's when you say, because what it means is there is an onus on the leader to be competent in the sense that if you want to gain the respect from the team, and the team should feel that they are under safe hands, essentially, you
Yes.
have to go beyond your way and kind of ensure that you know what you're doing. Not necessarily learn lot of technical capabilities, but probably at least know how to deal with insecurities or how to deal with, let's say, ambiguity. Right? That itself might be a skill. If you have that skill, people will still kind of find it safe to work under you. Character, as you mentioned, if you should say what you mean and you should mean what you say, I guess that's what it is. And the third thing is where I would like to go a bit deeper, benevolence, because what happens is oftentimes there are a couple of team members, right? Both of them are good, well-meaning. Both of them are respectful towards each other when they're discussing with each other. But there is this thing called vibe. So one team member says that they don't get good vibes from others, okay?
Yeah.
And the other person
Yeah.
also oftentimes ends up saying the same thing. And so, in spite of no harsh words being said, no humiliation, people start sensing these vibes and they kind of start
Mm.
closing up because they don't feel comfortable with the other person sitting around. Any kind of insights you have on that? Like, how can it be dealt with? Or probably,
If people are describing a vibe, it's a little bit ambiguous though, isn't it?
right?
And is the vibe about I don't trust them because is it about I don't get a sense that this person has my best interests at heart, which would be more maybe in the care and the integrity factors? Do I
Mm-hmm,
think maybe more along the lines of really don't think they know what they're doing, which would be more the competence? And so what I'd be interested in, the people who describe it as a vibe, I'd probably want
mm-hmm,
to dig a little bit deeper. And that is, all
mm-hmm.
right, tell me about vibe. Vibe doesn't give me much information here. When you say
Okay.
you've got a vibe, I take that to mean you're not fully trusting, but I'm wondering why that is specifically. Rather than a general vibe, specifically
Mm,
what evidence do you have or not
mm,
have? And
okay.
see if you can dig a little bit deeper. Generally speaking, when people talk about a vibe, I think somewhere within they're doubting. And this is
Mm-hmm,
just my guess based on what you're saying here, Pradeep. My guess would be they're somehow doubting that the person has my best interests at heart or are operating from a space of integrity or character.
mm,
That would be my
okay.
guess. But I'd really want to, if somebody said to me, oh, I'm getting a vibe about this new manager, I'd probably just want to, just dig a little bit deeper and see it more objectively what the vibe actually means.
Like one last question around the same thing. Let's say the person tells you, the employee, ki, I am getting a vibe that the other person does not have my best interest in his heart. And he's always kind of scheming things around me. Maybe partly his imagination, partly might be true also, right? Some people have this capacity to sense vibes better than others, right? I'm not very good at it, frankly, and I don't care. But I often, being a manager, I often come across people who complain to me, particularly ladies, that they are not getting good vibes from others, and they're not comfortable working with them for whatever reason. The thing is, the evidence that is generally presented here is not something concrete, okay? And professionally you cannot kind of take any steps here right? So probably it's just left to the person itself to deal with it, right?
Look, I wouldn't have a blanket yes or no because, again, it's still ambiguous, isn't it? And again, if there's just the vibe, but without any tangible evidence or seemingly coherent reason, it's difficult to take any meaningful action on that. In my
Right.
organisation, though, and
Mm,
you know, we're all psychologists, so we tend to have a bit of an advantage there. But if there was a vibe, what I would probably do is because with the vibe thing, to me, it sounds like I don't feel totally safe with
mm-hmm.
regard to this other person. Maybe
Right.
there's no hard evidence, but I've just got this sense that I'm not somehow safe. There's a risk there.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, that is probably not psychological safety, right? Because I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel psychologically safe.
Correct.
And so, again, if it was me feeling the vibe, I'd probably want to check that out with my colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
do want to say, look, I can't really pin this down. I can't put my finger on anything, but I'm just getting a vibe and just
Mm-hmm.
talk it through maybe. But it would be difficult for a manager to take clear action based on a vibe. I think leaders should probably err on the side of caution.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it would be difficult to take it anywhere meaningful based on that
Okay.
description.
I think the when human psychology goes deeply involved, right, things become complex. Probably at the workplace, you should go with some rules in that case because, there's nothing in your hands actually. Okay. Going to the next question, Clive. How do trust and psychological safety translate to organizational success in terms of productivity and motivation?
Psychological and safety are not easy things to build. One of the quotes from my book was, trust arrives on foot but leaves on horseback. In other words, it can take time to build. It takes time and effort. And of course, we can lose it very quickly. Equally with psychological safety, it's leader dependent. It does take work, and leading in particular way. Why would you bother unless there's some really good payoffs?
Mm-hmm.
Not just for me as a leader, but also for the company, my team, the organization. So thankfully, there is quite a bit of evidence, Pradeep, on the benefits in terms of many things, whether it's motivational, productivity, and so forth. One of the biggest studies of all in terms of psychological safety was called Project Aristotle. Now, you may have heard of this because it was a Google-based study. It was a tech-based study.
Okay. Okay.
But thousands of people involved in the study, very wide scale. And what they were looking for in that study is what predicted high
Mm-hmm.
performing teams.
Okay.
And there were a number of things that did predict high performing teams. But right at the top of the list, and actually by a long way, was psychological safety. It was the strongest predictor of high performing teams. Now, why would that be? Well, you think about it, particularly in Google or tech firms generally, they rely a lot on innovation. And what we know is innovation is highest in teams that have psychological safety because people
Okay.
feel free to share ideas. They're not concerned that they'll be dismissed or ridiculed.
Mm.
They will share
Okay.
ideas. Again, think too, who would you rather work for? Would you rather work for the company that has no psychological safety or trust and people are just yelled at and screamed at and expected,
Mm-hmm.
or would you prefer to work for what I've just been describing? So, of course, companies with psychological safety have higher retention rates. They tend to keep
Okay.
their staff more. Equally, too, I think they're more able to recruit
Okay.
talented staff because of that.
Okay.
Other things,
Okay.
too, just out of interest, levels of engagement, yes, much higher in psychological safety. Levels of motivation, initiative, discretionary effort, that is going the extra mile, much more
Mm-hmm.
likely to happen where there's psychological safety. The opposite of that is where there's low trust or low psychological safety, people will tend to do the bare minimum.
Okay.
There's no discretionary effort there. And so forth. So there's quite a lot of research evidence that, yeah, this is not
Okay.
just about trust and psychological safety as nice
Mm-hmm.
things. They're
Mm-hmm.
really, really important things to output into high performing teams. Absolutely.
Sure, understood. Because there's always this tension between trying to kind of drive the team via pressure, right? And at the same time, if you're too lenient, right, the employees can start taking you a bit less seriously, right? So there is a sense of balance that needs to be put here. And what you're saying is there is enough data, enough evidence to indicate that in psychologically safe workplaces, creativity will be more and people will be more engaged. So the chances of something big happening there is probably greater than other organizations. Okay.
Absolutely.
The next question, and also the last question: what steps or actions can be taken by management to encourage psychological safety and trust in the workplace?
Yeah, and it's good to have practical steps, right? It's good to have some
Exactly.
ideas about things we can do rather than it being just this sort of ethereal thing. So again, just as a starting guide, going back to those three factors, yeah, the care, the character, the competence. They to me just give a little bit of a check to leaders. Am I operating in those ways? Demonstrating care, acting
Okay.
with integrity, and am I
Okay.
competent in the areas I need to be? So as an overall guide, the three C's are a pretty good guide there. Other big things, and something our organization I think is very good at, is creating the time and the space to actually bring our teams in and to hear from them. So not as a one-off event, but we will literally schedule time to bring just our own people. You can't bring huge amounts of people in all the time. But say my own team, which is 6 or 7 people, we will have dedicated times, and we all know we've got that time. And those conversations are about, what's working well, what's not, what are the current challenges, what are we learning?
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
if the team, again, are used to these meetings and knowing that it's absolutely safe to share their ideas as well as concerns, that
Mm-hmm.
alone helps to create that trust and that psychological safety. I guess, a lot of people would just say in simplistic terms, listening. Leaders need to
Mm-hmm.
really actively listen. But beyond that, we have to create the opportunities to listen. Otherwise, we
Okay.
get busy, right? And we get
Right.
distracted. We it's not that
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to listen, we just forget to do it. So it's really important that we schedule time to do that. Of course, fostering that open communication where it's safe for the team to speak up. Equally too, and this is psychology 101, Pradeep, when people do speak up, when people do contribute, make sure that we acknowledge that. If
Okay.
people are a little bit hesitant to speak up, something that
Mm.
can change their mind quite quickly is seeing somebody else who spoke up being acknowledged for it. And we're
Right.
teaching people very quickly, okay. So it is safe. It's not just leaders saying, because you can't just say your way to psychological safety. And I've
Right.
seen
Exactly.
evidence of this. You can't just say, right, I all want you to know this is a safe space, safe for you to share anything. And then somebody
Right.
puts their hand up and shares something and they're completely dismissed. No,
Mm-hmm.
that just takes everything backward. We need to recognize when people, even something unpleasant, even something that's a big challenge, if
Mm.
people have had the courage to voice it, we need to acknowledge them. Thank you for raising that. That's a really important point. It teaches others in the room, yes, it
Mm.
is safe. Other things, Pradeep, there's one of my favorite tools, goes back to the work of Edgar Schein, who did a lot of work in organizational culture. He called it
Okay.
humble inquiry. So inquiry is about asking great questions, but I
Mm.
like the humble, and that is taking the ego out of it, not assuming I
Okay.
know best, but going to my team with humble inquiry. How do you think we could make this better? What are your ideas
Okay.
on this?
Sure.
And so humble inquiry is a great skill to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Again, with diversity and inclusion, seeking more diverse views just than my
Mm-hmm.
own team, but actually seeking, inclusion, being a champion for inclusion and equity. I think we know from the research, the more diverse the voices you bring in, the better results you tend to get. Otherwise, you can have the just one group of people saying the same thing all the time. We potentially lose a lot of valuable information. And of course, to
Mm-hmm.
go back to the integrity piece, as a leader, following through on my
Mm-hmm.
commitments. And so
Okay.
just demonstrate what I said I would do, I do. I follow through, just to make sure that integrity is seen by all. Those are some of the
Sure.
main things that we can.
What I understand, Clive, is like psychological safety, creating an environment with psychological safety takes some effort, particularly on the leader's side. It's something that will happen automatically, right? We should not assume that, if there is a team, automatically they will know how to relate to each other and safe environment will get created. You have to put this effort where, as you mentioned, do active listening, which is paying attention to what people are saying, what people are feeling, kind of creating those meetings or those, those places where you can communicate with them. As you mentioned, do some humble inquiries where you mean what you
Yes.
say. You just don't ask questions for the sake of asking, and kind of the employee feels like whatever he or she is saying is being acknowledged. And very interesting. I think live it was a very thoughtful discussion, and people who are watching this, I would encourage them also to kind of share what has their idea, their experience with psychological safety when they have not felt safe, and what changes have made them feel safe in a workplace. And Clive, on that note, let's kind of have a few last words from you, whatever you want to share, and then wrap up this discussion.
Yeah, and look, just thinking back, and thank you, by the way, for the discussion. Also, may I acknowledge yourself. One thing you've been great at throughout this podcast is reflecting back what we've been talking about. You've done that exceptionally well, and I think that's a really great skill for leaders to have and communicators to have. So good on you. My own thought as you were speaking, it sounds like we may have been a bit hard on leaders, yeah, that they carry all this stuff. And I want to say, sometimes it's not that, leaders can't create psychological safety because they're bad leaders or anything like that. It's
Mm,
sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And don't assume just because, you hear about psychological safety, you think it might be valuable. Don't assume your leaders know what to do. They may not know what to do. So rather than blaming them for that, actually, the best thing you can do is provide training for them.
okay,
Just
okay.
train them in what they actually need to know would be a much better, rather than being dismissive or blaming them.
And I guess all the organization heads who are watching this podcast, it's a tip for them that if you feel like you're not getting sufficient innovation in your teams, or if you have large teams and a lot of leaders, probably you should think about doing a proper training for some of your leaders in this area of psychological safety. There are, I believe, a lot of courses, and you can of course connect with Mr. Clive, who has his own team. He has been doing this for the last 30 years. It would definitely be helpful, and it's something that will be permanent probably, because once people know how to deal with things, they don't unlearn it easily, right? So it would be a
That's a great point.
great investment. Yeah, I mean, thanks, Live. Thanks for your time. It was great discussion. Please stay in touch, and I would like kind of drop your link maybe in the description, so if somebody is interested in this kind of projects or discussions, probably they will connect with you. Thanks again. Thanks for your time.
Sure. Many,
Have a
many
nice day.
thanks. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.